Thanks, guys. And Eric, welcome back again to FreightWaves Now this morning. I feel like we just talked to you yesterday, but today we're touching on a little bit of a different subject, right? Tell us what the heck is going on with American Airlines.
Well, it's been in the news in the past couple days that American Airlines had to cancel um, hundreds of flights into July. I think they're doing about 50 to 80 a day because they don't have the capacity or the manpower to handle all these flights with so much travel demand coming back. I think the TSA said there's handled like 2.1 million passengers the other day. So air travel is like just booming back as people have all that pent up demand from the pandemic, and American and some of the other airlines thought they had enough capacity or put enough resources in place, but maybe weren't quite prepared, and so they got caught short. I think some of the ground handlers also, there's just a labor issue there, are having difficulty bringing people back on board. So, so that people are flights are getting canceled and people are having to wait or rebook. I think for me, the interesting point I wanted to make is that, yesterday you mentioned I was on the show and we talked about FedEx Freight, the LTL division of FedEx, and some of the quality control problems they had and why they cut off customers for a while, trying to get a handle on things so they could, improve service delivery times. And I think, it just goes to show that some of these pressures are evident in no matter what mode. But, FedEx was trying to avoid having to cancel or having service issues that where it got to the point of a breakdown in the system. So everyone handles things differently, and they try to be proactive, and maybe we're a little, aggressive in the way they handled it by telling hundreds of customers, we're not picking up your freight all of a sudden. But the impetus or the motivation was to not get into a situation like American did, where service was cut so bad that they had to try and take harder actions like canceling flights.
Interesting. So, Eric, is it exclusive to American Airlines that is having this issue, or does this extend to other airlines and it's more of a the ground personnel, or is that part of it, the ground personnel, the people in the airports that take care of it, the baggage handlers, the flight crew, the flight deck, I guess you call it, the
Right.
tarmac crews.
Yeah. So, and I think it was more than just the volume. I think also of travelers. There has been a lot of bad weather in Texas and around the eastern half of the United States that also contributed to cancellations, and also I think some computer issues at some airlines. I know Southwest has also had issues or cancellations and delays because of the travel volumes and the weather. So it's not just American and Southwest, but the ground handling situation or the tarmac workers is an issue beyond passenger, because it also is an issue in the cargo side of the airports. It's been that way since last April or May, when a lot of these ground handling companies lost so much passenger business that they let go a lot of people. But then there was a flood of freight coming in on these charter freighters with PPE and other things, and demand has remained strong, and so they've had a struggle trying to get back people into the workforce, who may be on the enhanced unemployment benefits, and so there's just a labor issue crunch right now with these ground handling companies.
So, Eric, you mentioned the cargo expansion by a lot of these companies, and we talked about Air Canada providing plans for their expansion soon as well. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on with WestJet in Canada, another Canadian company set to expand its cargo division.
Yeah, I mean, cargo is just you know, it's like a superstar all of a sudden in the transportation market. I think a couple years ago, 2 3 years ago, air cargo growth was okay. Maybe 2 or 3%, barely above inflation, but nothing too exciting. And people were wondering how much to invest. And now with the pandemic people see how important having those supply chains connected around the world with speed and having air cargo capacity. So, as you said, Air Canada, is creating a freighter division. They've always carried freight in the bottom of their passenger aircraft, but now they're standing up a whole division with 8 Boeing 767 wide-body jets next year or later this year, starting later this year with converted freighters. And now, yesterday, we had the news from another Canadian passenger airline, WestJet, that they are going to stand up or create a freighter division with 4 Boeing 737-800s, which are narrow body planes, but they're well suited for e-commerce and short regional flights. And so they're going to lease 4 planes that have been converted, and next year start a cargo division with a dedicated cargo service. And they say it's not going to be necessarily running lanes for any express carrier per se, but the planes will fly under their own brand.
Interesting. So you have these two really getting into their actual freighters. So I know you spoke with Delta, and their focus is on cargo as well. Are they focusing more on belly capacity, or are they going the freighter route as well? Could you talk to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But it does speak to the overall level of awareness that these airlines are starting to put on cargo as a business line, and the potential there for revenue or to balance out their operations. And so I did an interview that's on American Shipper and FreightWaves.com with Robert Walpole, Delta's vice president of cargo, and he explained that they've of course Delta's done about 2,600 cargo only flights where they use passenger planes as auxiliary freighters during the pandemic, but they're really dialing that back now. And basically they said that don't necessarily look at the number of cargo only flights to determine how seriously we're taking this now. That a lot of the cargo that's flying on what's a passenger route right now is a lot of the planes that are flying on passenger routes now are heavily cargo influenced, in that the cargo is really dictating which flights go and which routes are picked and how the network is being designed. So maybe you have 20 people on an international route, which is not very much, but the cargo is leading the way, or cargo is has a bigger seat at the table deciding which city pairs to start up again because of the value of cargo. So you're just overall, whether you're starting a freighter division or you have you're deciding how to set up your passenger network coming out of the pandemic, cargo is really taking a big lead now.
Eric, you're mentioning that idea of these carriers kind of setting up that passenger network around where their cargo is going. As a passenger, do you think that you should start to expect changes to your typical flights and changes to your flight offerings because these other companies are going to kind of take the leaf out of Delta's book and maybe look and say, yeah, you know what, we should kind of change our network around this too. So if you're a passenger, you may be used to flying direct from Chattanooga to Dallas, and maybe that changes now to accommodate those cargo expectations?
I don't know about the cargo expectations as a passenger, that would influence things. But I do think that in what you're hearing from analysts is that, coming out of the pandemic, the airlines will just be fundamentally changed, right? They've downsized a fair amount by necessity to save money. And even as they build up, they're not going to be as big or reach 2019 levels, for 2 or 3 years. And so that means just fewer routes. Maybe they go between 2 cities, but not with quite as many frequencies a day. So those types of factors will influence, and then where they put those fewer frequencies may be influenced by cargo. So I don't think there's a direct correlation for the passenger, but it's all part of this post-pandemic readjustment that the airlines are going through that will have some impact.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was the build back of the airlines. I always felt after last year, and we talked about this many times, Eric, it'll be interesting to see how they come back and how they rebuild their networks. And that belly cargo and that freight movement was built on passengers. When passengers do it, then they would open up this expansion. and that's what would
Right.
happen. But it's good, like the opposite now,
Yep.
right? Which is interesting. Interesting point that you brought
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
But
Right.
thank you so much, Eric.